Astrology enthusiasts learn quite early in their journey that the natal chart is divided into 12 houses. Think of your natal chart as if it were a pie, and then you cut the pie into 12 slices. These are the 12 houses. But what many people may not know is that there is more than one way to derive the 12 houses of the natal chart. In this mini training, you'll be introduced to the most important house systems out there, as well as the pros and cons of using one over the other. Disclaimer: there is no right or wrong house system. They all work. When referring to the different house systems in use, astrologer Robert Hand said which is truer, French or German, which of course means that no house system is superior to another. You want to use that house system that works best for you, while keeping in mind that the other house systems work too. If you are a French speaker, you may well stick to French. If you've always used Placidus and you speak the Placidus language, you may want to stick to Placidus. Or, if you want to expand your horizons and experiment with different houses, that's an option also. The most important house systems in use are Placidus, whole sign houses, equal houses, porphyry, coke, topocentric, and regiomontanus. In this training, we will cover the most popular 4 house systems: Placidus, whole sign houses, equal houses, and porphyry. The overwhelming majority of students learn astrology with Placidus. Since Placidus is the default house system on most astrology websites on the internet, such as astro.com, astro-seek.com, astrotheme, or Cafe Astrology. However, in the past few years, many students, especially millennials, use the whole sign house system. Since many popular millennial astrologers on YouTube teach astrology with whole sign houses, and many of Generation Z, the youngest generation of astrology enthusiasts, have learned astrology with porphyry houses. Since the famous CoStar mobile app, which was launched in 2017, is based on the porphyry house system. Whether you use a free website calculator like astro.com or astrology software such as SolarFire or Astro Gold, it is very easy to select the house system of choice. On astro.com, for example, you go to the House Systems section and select the house system you want to use. Now let's take a brief look at the 4 house systems we will cover in this training: whole sign, equal houses, porphyry, and Placidus. When we classify and compare these house systems, one big difference is the size of the houses. With whole signs and equal houses, each house has 30 degrees each, while porphyry and Placidus houses differ in size. Whole sign and equal sign systems, also called non-quadrant house systems, are the reflection of the 12 signs of the zodiac. The same thinking and principles used to derive 12 equal zodiac signs is also used to derive the 12 equal houses. On the other hand, quadrant house systems, porphyry and Placidus, include the midheaven in the calculation, so the size of the houses differ based on the location and time of birth. Let's start with whole sign houses. In this house division system, all 12 houses are 30 degrees each. The first house begins at 0 degrees of the zodiac sign in which the ascendant falls, regardless of how early or late in that sign the ascendant is. So if your ascendant is 12 degrees Cancer, your first house begins at 0 degrees Cancer and ends at 29 degrees Cancer. The next sign becomes the second house. The sign after that, the third house, and so on. In other words, each house is wholly filled by one sign. So we only have one house corresponding to one sign. Whole sign houses was the main system used in Hellenistic astrology, and is also used in Indian and medieval astrology. It is believed to be the oldest system of house division. Let's move on to the second house system, equal houses. In the equal house system, the ecliptic is also divided into 12 divisions of 30 degrees. But the difference is that the houses are measured out in 30-degree increments starting from the degree of the ascendant. The first house begins with the ascendant, which acts as the cusp of the first house. Then the second house begins exactly 30 degrees later in zodiacal order. Then the third house begins exactly 30 degrees later in zodiacal order from the second house, and so on. If your ascendant is 10 degrees Cancer, then your first house begins at 10 degrees Cancer, your second house at 10 degrees Leo, your third house at 10 degrees Virgo, and so on. The distinction between equal houses and whole sign houses is that in whole sign houses the cusp of the first house is at the beginning of the sign that contains the ascendant, while in equal houses the degree of the ascendant is itself the cusp of the first house. Now that we have taken a brief look at the non-quadrant house systems, let's move on to the second category of house systems, called quadrant houses. Unlike whole sign houses and equal houses, which are based on the ascendant, quadrant houses include the midheaven and the IC in the division. In quadrant houses, the midheaven is a part of the house divisions, whereas in whole sign and equal houses, midheaven and the IC are still important, but are floating points, and are not included in the division of the houses. We could say that non-quadrant house systems are ascendant-based, and quadrant house systems are midheaven-based. The most popular quadrant house systems are Porphyry and Placidus. The Porphyry house system is similar to equal houses, but it also takes into account the midheaven. So instead of having 12 equal houses, we have 4 quadrants, and each quadrant is divided into 3 equal parts. At a very simplistic level, we can say that Porphyry is a mix of Placidus, the most popular quadrant house system, and equal houses. Last, but definitely not least, Placidus is the most commonly used house system in modern Western astrology. Even if you're not familiar with the different house systems out there, and it's the first time you hear about Placidus, chances are you're already using it, since Placidus is the default house system of most astrology software and websites. Placidus is a time-based house system, so includes the dimension of time in its calculations, in contrast with the other house systems which are purely space-based. The difference between Placidus and Porphyry is that Placidus is based on how long the sun takes to travel from one angle to the next, and divides this time interval by 3, while Porphyry calculates how much space the sun has traveled and divides this space by 3. Because the Earth is tilted, the sun can spend more time in some areas than in others, and that's why with Placidus, unlike Porphyry, the 3 houses inside of a quadrant are not always equal in size. The advantage of the Placidus house system, thanks to how it's calculated, is that it allows for personalization of the astrological houses for each person. One criticism of Placidus is that the size of the houses can differ a lot, depending on the latitude of your birth location. People born close to the equator will always have equal-sized houses, just like with whole sign and equal sign houses. However, when you start to move away from the equator, the size of some of the houses increases a lot, to the detriment of others. If you are born close to one of the poles, for example in Northern Europe or Canada, some houses can be very small, and you can have a disproportionate number of planets in only 1 or 2 houses of your natal chart. This consideration would imply that people born closer to the poles have a much more imbalanced chart, or that some areas of their life are much less represented than others, compared to people born closer to the equator. If you are born in northern Sweden, for example, your natal chart would look something like this. Whole sign and equal sign houses solve this problem, giving equal emphasis to each of the 12 houses, or 12 different areas of our lives. In addition, with Placidus and other quadrant house systems, we partially lose the analogy of the houses and the zodiac. Many people criticize the Placidus system for being too focused on the terrestrial globe, rather than the Earth in the context of the solar system. Whole signs and equal signs are much like the zodiac and are derived from the division of 12. The division of 12 comes from the 12 lunar cycles we have during a solar year, or Earth's 365-day revolution around the Sun. In 1 year, we have 12 equal lunar cycles. So that's how we get the basic 12 archetypes, or the 12 signs. With whole signs and equal signs, we take the same division and we apply it to the chart. If we believe the 12 signs are equal, of 30 degrees each, then we apply the same logic to derive the houses. Whole signs and equal houses are based on predictable cycles and tend to show more of the underlying themes of the chart. Quadrant systems are based on the midheaven and take into account specific circumstances at birth, like the latitude and the season. That's why they tend to show our personal experience of the chart, rather than the underlying themes. The whole sign house system is the easiest to use. As long as you know your ascendant sign, you can determine all the other houses. The equal house system is also relatively easy to use. Once you know the degree of the ascendant, you know the cusp of all the other houses. Placidus is the most complex, and while it allows for personalization, keep in mind that the more complex does not necessarily mean better or superior. Again, there is no right or wrong house system. Just like all roads lead to Rome, each house system, when used with consistency, is a good framework to reading charts. And now, the big question. Which house system should you use? If you already have some experience with charts, our recommendation is to stick to the same house system you've been using so far, so that you don't get sidetracked. If, however, you are reading charts fluently, perhaps now it's time to experiment with a different house system. If you've always used Placidus, you can start experimenting with equal houses or whole sign houses, or the other way around. Give yourself time. It takes years and years of practice to become proficient in a new house system. But for some people, this may be a journey worth embarking on. Becoming fluent in different house systems can help you look at the chart from different angles and to have a more holistic view and a more nuanced understanding of the energies at play. If you are new to astrology, then this training will hopefully give you some theoretical background to help you choose one house system that you will like to use going forward. Don't overthink it. Trust your intuition. And remember, all house systems work. Once you choose one house system, stick to it until you become fluent and can read charts with ease. Don't mix up different house systems unless you are an experienced astrologer. Here are a few tips to consider when choosing which house system to use. Tip number 1. Pay attention to your natal chart placements. Run your chart through different house systems. Pay attention to those planets that fall in different houses depending on the house system you use. Perhaps Venus is in your 3rd house with Placidus, but in the 4th house with equal houses. Which descriptions do you identify with the most? Tip number 2. Pay attention to your transits, especially the transits of slow-moving planets like Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, or Pluto. These are important transits that rarely go unnoticed, so a shift from one house to the next will not go unnoticed either. Pay attention when you witness a shift in energy. Is it when Jupiter crosses the degree of your Placidus house? The degree of your Porphyry house? The degree of your equal house? Or do you notice the shift when Jupiter moves into a new sign and a new whole sign house? If this house theory feels overly complicated, remember you don't have to deep dive into it or use all these different house systems. You can continue using the same house system you've been using. And if you ever, at any point, feel like experimenting with a new house system, just keep in mind that you can do that.